The court was completely silent except for the echo of sneakers scuffing against the shiny tile. The crowd held their breath as the scoreboard showed the final seconds of the game. Ethan, the boy everyone at school called dumb and useless, held the ball as if it were an impossible weight to carry. His gaze, once timid and filled with fear, now burned with an inexplicable confidence. The coach had risked everything by putting him on the field, and his teammates turned up their noses, convinced that this would be the final play that would seal the school's defeat. The parents in the stands whispered among themselves, some laughing mockingly, others questioning the coach's sanity. Why put this kid in now? "He'll ruin everything," they muttered. But Ethan wasn't listening. He could only hear his own rapid breathing, his heart beating like a war drum. The ball felt like it was burning in his hands. But something inside him told him this was his moment. Across the court, Marcus, the mysterious tutor everyone thought was just a community volunteer, watched silently. His eyes were fixed on Ethan, carrying the certainty that the boy had more than talent. He had a spirit no one else could see. Marcus knew well that look of someone who had always been diminished and humiliated. It was the same look he had years ago before he became an NBA legend. The whistle blew, signaling the start of the final play. Ethan's teammates, still wary, ran in different directions, avoiding passing the ball to him. But fate seemed to mock them, because in the midst of the confusion, the ball ended up right in Ethan's hands. The stands erupted in boos and murmurs, certain that all was lost. The opponents surrounded Ethan, believing it would be easy to snatch the ball from the school loser. But in one swift, precise movement, the boy pivoted, found space, and rose to shoot. Time seemed to stand still. Every second of the ball's flight through the air felt like an eternity. Marcus clenched his fists, feeling a shiver run down his spine. And then the ball fell straight into the basket, exploding with a dry, glorious thud. 3 points. The crowd was shocked. Some stood up in disbelief. Others simply covered their mouths in astonishment. Ethan didn't celebrate. He just lowered his head, sweating, breathing deeply as if waiting for the next chance. He knew it wasn't over yet. The game continued, and each time the ball found his hands, the impossible happened. Shot after shot, Ethan proved that all the prejudice he'd endured, all the humiliation, all the laughter, were nothing compared to the talent hidden within him. With each basket, the crowd went from mockery to euphoria, unable to believe their eyes. His teammates, who had previously ignored him, began to look at him in surprise. First suspicious, then desperate for the ball to reach him. The school idiot was now the only one capable of turning the score around. The entire stadium was on its feet, shouting, jumping, filled with the electric energy of a championship final that seemed written by a miracle. Marcus felt his eyes well up. He knew this wasn't just a game. It was living proof that talent knows no color, class, or label. It was a victory against every voice that told Ethan he'd never amount to anything. The final whistle blew, and the scoreboard showed the school had won for the first time in 50 years. Ethan, exhausted, fell to his knees in the middle of the court, in disbelief at what he had just done. The screams echoed like thunder, but to him it was only silence. Marcus walked slowly toward the boy, his smile concealing a secret that would soon be revealed, because no one there knew that the man who transformed Ethan was actually one of the biggest basketball stars in the world. At that same school, months before the finals, Ethan walked the halls with his books clutched to his chest. He was a thin boy with disheveled blonde hair and glasses too big for his face. Always with his head down, he went unnoticed by many, but for some classmates he was a constant target. Laughter echoed as he passed, and cruel nicknames repeated like a sentence. Dumb. Failure. Loser. Each word weighed like a stone on his fragile shoulders. In the classroom, the scenario was no different. Ethan struggled to express himself in public. The answers he knew stuck in his throat, swallowed back by the fear of making mistakes and being laughed at. His teachers, tired of his shyness, had already given up encouraging him. Many believed his reputation as a hopeless student, but no one knew that at home, the boy spent hours solving advanced math problems and reading books that no one his age even knew about. He was a hidden genius, stifled by prejudice and labeling. It was in this context that Marcus appeared, a tall, dark-skinned man with a firm voice and deep eyes. He introduced himself as a community volunteer, offering help to young people who wanted to believe in their dreams. At first, Ethan was suspicious. He'd never had anyone truly believe in him. However, there was something in the way Marcus looked at him, not with pity but with respect that made the boy accept the mentorship. It was the beginning of a connection that would change their lives forever. Marcus saw more than just a student in Ethan. He saw a reflection of what he had experienced in the past, when he too had been called useless, when he too had borne the burden of exclusion because of his skin color. What no one at school knew was that Marcus wasn't just any volunteer. He was in fact Marcus Johnson, a millionaire NBA star who had anonymously returned to his hometown. But for Ethan, Marcus was just the first adult to believe in his capabilities. At each secret practice on the abandoned neighborhood court, Marcus taught Ethan not only the fundamentals of basketball, but also the importance of confidence. Believing in yourself is the first step to winning, he would say, as the boy sweated, failing and trying again. Ethan was uncoordinated at first, tripping over his own feet. But there was a drive within him that Marcus recognized, a hunger to prove to the world that he wasn't what everyone said. Meanwhile, Ethan's classmates watched his changes from afar. He started hanging out with Marcus during breaks, which sparked more cruel laughter. "Look, the loser is now hanging out with a black guy. I bet they're going to start the club of the useless." They mocked, drawing laughter from the more popular students. Ethan felt his heart sink, but this time he wouldn't give up. Just having Marcus by his side was a shield against the daily humiliations. Parents of some students also criticized the approach. They murmured among themselves that black man wasn't a good influence on the school. They even insinuated that Marcus wanted to take advantage of the boys. But no one had the courage to confront him directly, because his presence commanded respect. Marcus, however, was used to it. "I knew that prejudice didn't just come from young people, but was ingrained in entire families." He simply kept his focus on Ethan as if nothing could distract him. Over time, Ethan began to show signs of transformation. His posture changed, his shoulders were no longer slumped, and his once dull eyes now held a spark of determination. But this growth only increased the anger of those who wanted to see him fail. The school's basketball team, made up of the most popular kids, began to ridicule him even more. "This kid can't even walk properly, let alone play," they would say whenever they saw him practicing alone. Marcus, however, insisted, "They don't need to believe you now, Ethan. They just need to see you in action when the time is right." The boy listened and absorbed every word as if they were seeds planted in his mind. Slowly, he began to understand that he didn't need to prove anything to his teammates. He needed to prove it to himself. And with each practice, his moves became sharper, his throws more accurate. The shy failure was becoming a quiet prodigy, but the tension within the school only grew. Ethan became the target of physical harassment. Shoved in the hallway, notebooks snatched from his hands, offensive notes thrown on his desk. There were days when he almost gave up, but he always remembered Marcus's firm gaze and his words. "You weren't born to be what they say. You were born to be so much more." That was the fuel he needed to resist giving up. The escalating prejudice became unbearable. But it was precisely in this hostile environment that Ethan began to forge himself as someone different. The suffering was still there, the pain still lingered, but something new was blossoming in his heart. The hope that, with Marcus's help, one day everyone would have to swallow the cruel words they had hurled at him. And so, without anyone noticing, the story of a humiliated boy and a hidden star began to intertwine, paving the way for the greatest revelation the school would ever witness. Destiny approached, and each provocation only fueled the flame that would soon ignite the court. In the school hallways, Ethan walked like a shadow. With every step, he felt the gazes weigh down on him like sharp stones. Some laughed openly, others merely whispered, but all of them made him feel invisible and at the same time exposed. The nickname dumb was no longer just a word. It was an identity forced upon him, a label that stuck to his skin like an indelible scar. Class became a daily torment. When the teacher asked questions, Ethan would lower his head, even though he knew the answer. It wasn't fear of getting it wrong, but of getting it right and becoming the target of more laughter. He learned to hide his intelligence, pretending to be less than he really was, because any display of ability would be grounds for accusations of showboating. School, which was supposed to be a place of growth, was his prison. At lunchtime, Ethan would isolate himself at a distant table, always alone. He watched the others laugh in groups, sharing stories, while he shared only silence and solitude. Often the boys on the basketball team would throw scraps of food in his direction, laughing at the way he cowered. "Look at the loser trying to hide again," they'd shout, laughing. The entire cafeteria seemed to conspire against him. The teasing didn't stop at school. Upon returning home, Ethan faced indifference from his neighborhood, where he was also seen as the weird kid. Some neighbors commented that he would never amount to anything, that he was always daydreaming. His only refuge was his small, cramped room, where at night he would read in silence or mentally practice the moves Marcus taught him. There, away from the cruel gazes, he could be his true self. Even with Marcus by his side, there were times when the pain was unbearable. The boy felt torn. On one side, the hope his guardian brought him. On the other, the crushing weight of rejection. How many times had he cried silently, without letting anyone notice? He held the pillow against his face to muffle his sobs, silently begging for it all to end one day. Loneliness was his greatest enemy. Marcus could see the sadness in the boy's eyes. "Ethan, you have to believe in yourself even when no one else does," he said, trying to boost his self-esteem. But Ethan only smiled weakly, not daring to admit that he no longer knew if he had the strength to fight. The suffering seemed stronger than any hope. Still, he kept going to training, as if every drop of sweat were a scream trapped in his throat. One day, after yet another series of humiliations, Ethan considered giving up. He was walking down the street with his head down, dragging his feet, when he passed a block lit only by an old streetlight. It was there that Marcus found him, standing there, staring at the rusty basket. "Why did you stop believing in yourself?" he asked calmly. Ethan didn't answer. He just let the tears fall, revealing how broken he was inside. That was one of the most painful moments. Marcus then shared a piece of his own story. He revealed that, as a young man, he was also called useless, also despised for being black, and also had days when he thought about giving up. "But I chose to fight, and today I'm here believing in you," he said, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder. These words entered like a spark amid the darkness. However, the school was relentless. The closer Ethan got to Marcus, the more cruel the comments became. Now, besides being called dumb, he was also called traitor and the black guy's friend. The laughter sounded like whips, growing louder and sharper. He pretended not to hear, but each word was a new wound. The feeling of isolation grew, and even the teachers often turned a blind eye to the taunts. Ethan began to believe that he truly didn't belong anywhere. He didn't fit in with his white classmates who ridiculed him, nor with the few who might have supported him. The only bright spot in his life was Marcus, but even that made him feel even more isolated, because no one understood this unlikely friendship. It was as if the whole world conspired to leave him alone. At home, his mother tried to encourage him, but she was overwhelmed with 2 jobs and little time to pay attention. His father had abandoned the family years ago, and this only deepened the emptiness Ethan felt. The silence of the nights was filled only with the echoes of the insults he'd heard during the day. He replayed each cruel word in his mind, and the more he thought about it, the more he believed they might be true. But even at rock bottom, there was something that wouldn't die inside him, the desire to change his story. He didn't know how or when, but he felt he couldn't let himself be defeated by prejudice. Marcus had planted this seed, and even amidst the suffering, it was beginning to germinate. Ethan was still the shy and isolated boy, but within him, silently, a prodigy was about to awaken. The school gymnasium was packed on that open practice day, when parents and classmates could watch the team prepare. Ethan had been called in by the coach simply to help fill the court, with no real expectation of participation. The starting lineup snickered, exchanging mischievous glances as he walked in with his wrinkled uniform and worn-out sneakers. Marcus, sitting discreetly in the stands, watched with a worried look, sensing something bad was about to happen. The coach assigned the roles but made it clear that Ethan was simply to stay out of the way. The words felt like a punch to the gut. His teammates wasted no time. They began shoving him during practice, feigning violent collisions, laughing when he fell to the ground. "Get up, loser. Basketball isn't for you," one of the more popular kids shouted, drawing laughter from the audience. Ethan choked back tears, got up, and tried to keep going. When the ball finally reached his hands, Ethan held it tightly, feeling a strange warmth course through his body. But before he could shoot, one of the players deliberately took the ball and shoved him hard, knocking him down in front of everyone. The crowd erupted in laughter and applause as if it were a spectacle. The coach simply shook his head, saying nothing. The adult's complicit silence hurt more than the screams of his teammates. Ethan remained on the ground for a few seconds, feeling shame burn through him. It was as if he were naked before hundreds of eyes mocking his existence. The laughter echoed in his mind, mixed with the words he'd always heard: stupid, useless, dead weight. He wanted to disappear. He wanted the ground to open up and swallow him, never to be the target of such cruelty again. Marcus stood up in the stands, indignant. He wanted to intervene, but knew doing so would put Ethan in an even more vulnerable position. So he remained silent, his heart sinking, watching the boy struggle to his feet. Ethan's gaze met his for a moment, and Marcus simply nodded in support, trying to convey strength from a distance. It was a silent exchange of courage. His teammates didn't stop. Instead of playing normally, they began a cruel act, pretending Ethan was invisible. They never passed him the ball. Whenever he found himself in an open position to shoot, they chose to ignore him and pass to someone else. Every play was a message: you don't belong here. The audience laughed, and some parents loudly commented that the boy was bringing shame to the school. The psychological onslaught was relentless. At the height of his humiliation, one of the players pretended to trip and spilled his water bottle on Ethan, as if it were an accident. "Oops, sorry, Einstein," he said sarcastically, reinforcing his cruel nickname. Water dripped down his uniform, making him even more uncomfortable. The laughter was deafening, and Ethan's face turned fiery red. His eyes welled up, but he refused to cry in front of them. The internal battle was fierce. The coach, instead of reprimanding those responsible, looked at Ethan and said, "If you can't handle it, maybe you shouldn't come anymore." Those words were like a blade cutting through his soul. It wasn't enough to be ridiculed by his peers. Even the authority figure who should have guided him reinforced the idea that he was worthless. Ethan felt crushed, as if the entire gym was against him, with no ally other than Marcus. The boy finished practice alone, sitting on the bench, with no one approaching. He watched the others laugh and celebrate every play as if he had never existed. It was confirmation of his exclusion. The feeling of loneliness was so strong it seemed to suffocate him. In his mind, a question hammered: why did he keep trying? Why did he insist on a place that clearly didn't want him? That night at home, Ethan could barely bear to look at himself in the mirror. His wet uniform, the scratches on his arm, the exhaustion etched on his face. He felt like a ghost inside his own body. I could hear the echoing laughter, as if he were still inside the gym. He held the ball Marcus had given him and considered giving up on everything. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I'll never make it," he murmured, letting a tear run down his face. But even amidst his despair, the memory of Marcus's gaze during training wouldn't leave him alone. There was a silent promise there, a certainty that someone still believed in him. That spark, however small, was enough to keep Ethan from throwing everything away. He didn't know how, but he felt there was still something in store for him in the future. The extreme injustice had left deep scars. The state championship was in full swing. Ethan's school had reached the finals for the first time in decades, but the fans' confidence was entirely focused on the starters. No one mentioned Ethan's name, as if he were just a disposable part. While his teammates cheered, he remained on the bench, invisible. Marcus sat there in the crowd, arms crossed and eyes alert, knowing something special was about to happen. The gymnasium was packed. Parents, students, and teachers cheered, holding flags and signs, transforming the space into a cauldron of anticipation. The game started intensely, with the opposing team showing superiority in the opening minutes. Ethan's starting players, once so confident, began to falter. Missed shots, dropped passes, and the score gap only widened. The fans, who had started excited, now appeared frustrated and apprehensive. The coach was in a cold sweat, pacing back and forth. He tried to reorganize the team, but nothing seemed to work. With each mistake, the tension grew. Parents shouted from the stands, some accusing the coach of poor choices, others demanding changes. But no one imagined the most radical change was about to happen. Ethan, sitting at the end of the bench, watched silently, his heart racing and his hands shaking. As the clock ticked down to the final quarter, and the deficit seemed impossible to overcome, the coach made a desperate decision. He looked at the bench, hesitated for a few seconds, and then, with a choked voice, called out, "Ethan, it's your turn now." The entire gymnasium erupted in murmurs and laughter. Many couldn't believe what they were hearing. Putting the school idiot in a final? It was the biggest mistake they could make, they said aloud. Ethan stood up slowly, feeling the heavy gaze of every eye on him. His teammates frowned, some shaking their heads in disapproval. Is he seriously going to play now? "We're doomed," they whispered. But Marcus, from the stands, discreetly stood up and clapped alone. It was a small gesture, but it was enough to fill Ethan with courage. He took a deep breath and walked onto the court. At first, his teammates' plan was clear. Don't pass the ball to him. They ran, moved, but always chased each other. Ethan moved, created space, but was ignored. The fans laughed, and some shouted ironically, "Pass it to him, go on." "Let the loser try." The taunts echoed, increasing the pressure even more. It seemed as if fate was conspiring to repeat the same humiliation. Then, in a confusing play, the ball fell into Ethan's hands. The entire gym held its breath. His teammates hesitated, expecting him to miss and confirm his reputation as useless. But instead, Ethan held on tight, took 2 steps back and shot. The ball sliced through the air in slow motion, and silence fell. The metallic thud of the basket confirmed the impossible. A clean 3-pointer. The stands were shocked. For a few seconds, no one knew whether to boo or applaud. The coach's eyes widened in disbelief. But Marcus smiled, feeling a lump in his throat. Ethan didn't celebrate, just lowered his head and returned to defense. It was as if he were silently saying, "It's not over yet. I can do more." And truly, it was just beginning. The following plays were a spectacle. Each time the ball fell into his hands, the improbable repeated itself. Triple after triple, Ethan turned humiliation into glory. With each accurate shot, the previously hostile gym began to shift its energy. Boos turned to applause, disbelief turned to hope. His teammates, who had ignored him, now rushed to pass him the ball, understanding that he was the key to the comeback. The score began to dwindle. 10 points, 8 points, 5 points. The crowd was on its feet, cheering with every play. Ethan, sweating, was breathing heavily, but he showed no fear. His eyes were fixed on the basket as if the whole world had disappeared. He was no longer the shy, humiliated boy. He was a prodigy finally unleashed. Marcus watched in emotion, murmuring under his breath, "Show them who you are, kid." In the final seconds, the ball fell back into his hands. The scoreboard showed a tie. The gym was silent, everyone's eyes fixed on him. Ethan raised his arms, time seeming to stand still. The ball flew, describing a perfect arc. When it touched the net, confirming another 3 points, the gym erupted in deafening cheers. The school had won a championship after 50 years of defeat. Ethan was in the center of glory. He fell to his knees, exhausted, tears in his eyes. His teammates hugged him. His parents shouted his name, and even the coach, who had previously ignored him, raised his arms in celebration. But deep down, Ethan knew. This victory wasn't just about basketball. It was a victory against all prejudice, against all humiliation, against everyone who had made him believe he was nothing. He had become everything. After the final, Ethan became a school hero. His name was everywhere in the hallways. People who had previously laughed now rushed to shake his hand. Teachers congratulated him. Classmates wanted to be by his side, and even strangers asked for autographs on notebooks and basketballs. It was an unimaginable scenario for someone who, until weeks ago, had been considered a failure. But Ethan, despite the glittering light, remained humble. In his heart, he knew he wouldn't have gotten there without Marcus. In the following days, the interviews began to pour in. Journalists wanted to know who this kid was who had led their school to the title after 50 years. Reporters crowded outside his house while sports magazines splashed his face on the cover. However, one question echoed among everyone. Who was the mysterious man in the stands who celebrated every point Ethan scored? No one knew for sure, but the cameras had caught Marcus applauding alone before everyone else. Intrigued, the school principal invited Marcus to a meeting. They wanted to thank him for the inspiration he'd given the young athlete. Marcus accepted the invitation, arriving discreetly as he always did. However, in that room, surrounded by teachers, journalists, and even local officials, he knew he could no longer hide. Ethan watched nervously from the sidelines, unaware that he was about to discover a secret that would change everything. Marcus took a deep breath and stood. His gaze swept the silent room until his words cut through the air. My full name is Marcus Brown, and years ago, before I became an investor, I was also considered a failure at this very school. The impact was immediate. Murmurs arose and people looked at each other in disbelief. Ethan's eyes widened, uncomprehending. Marcus wasn't just a retired janitor, he was, in fact, a millionaire who had quietly built empires without ever flaunting his wealth. He said that, as a young man, he suffered similar humiliations to Ethan. He was called stupid, incapable, and without a future. He lived in an orphanage, and many believed he would never amount to anything. However, contrary to expectations, he studied independently, immersed himself in books, worked in silence, and built his fortune in technology and investments. But he never forgot the pain of his youth. So when he saw Ethan being humiliated, he decided to help him, as he wished someone had done for him. The entire room remained in shock. For many, it was inconceivable that this simple man, always seen as the old janitor, was actually one of the state's greatest philanthropists. But for Ethan, the revelation was even more profound. He felt tears well up as he realized that Marcus was a reflection of who he himself could become. Someone who transformed pain into strength, humiliation into greatness. Marcus wasn't just a mentor. He was living proof that labels don't define anyone. Marcus then announced something even bigger. He revealed that he had created a secret, and so on that silent night as he gazed at the stars from his bedroom window, Ethan smiled. He was no longer the school loser. He was a winner, not just because of basketball, but because he had discovered that true wealth lies not in momentary glory, but in the courage to never give up. Marcus had changed his life forever, and the future was now an open road, lit by the flame of overcoming obstacles. Months after the final, Ethan's life had completely changed. He was now training at a prestigious university, with a full scholarship funded by Marcus's fund. His routine was intense, divided between studies and basketball, but he saw each challenge as a gift. He remembered the time when no one believed in him, and this drove him to always give his best. Every drop of sweat carried the memory of the humiliation that had wrought upon him. Gradually, Ethan gained national notoriety. His performances caught the attention of NBA scouts, who were impressed by his three-point shooting accuracy. However, what drew most attention wasn't just his skill, but his humble demeanor. In interviews, he always reminded everyone of where he came from. "I'm only here because someone believed in me when no one else did," he would say, pointing to Marcus, who stood by him as a mentor and inseparable friend. At university, Ethan began inspiring other young people who were also targets of prejudice. Many sought him out for advice, sharing stories of rejection, poverty, and disbelief. He always responded with the same phrase: "They can try to define who you are, but only you can prove who you truly are." These words spread, and soon he became not only a promising player, but also a voice of hope for thousands of students. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his quiet mission. He expanded his scholarship fund, enabling other young people to access education and sports. Unlike before, there was no longer anonymity. His face was in every headline, but he still kept his simple style, wearing modest clothes and living humbly. "Wealth without purpose is just vanity," he said, and Ethan increasingly understood the weight of those words. The reunion with his old school was one of the most memorable moments. Ethan was invited to speak at a ceremony, now celebrated as a hero. The same hallways that once echoed with insults were now covered with posters bearing his name. On stage, before teachers, classmates, and even those who had humiliated him, Ethan took a deep breath and said, "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to show that prejudice doesn't define anyone's future. You called me stupid, but it was thanks to that I found the strength to prove I could be so much more." The words struck a chord. Some of his classmates, who had previously persecuted him, lowered their heads in shame. Parents in the audience wept, teachers applauded, and even the coach, with tears in his eyes, publicly apologized. Ethan, instead of rejecting him, embraced him, showing that greatness also lies in forgiveness. Marcus in the background watched with pride. He knew this boy had already become a man. Shortly thereafter, the big news arrived. Ethan was selected in the NBA draft. The entire school celebrated, the university cheered, and the city was filled with pride. But for Ethan, what mattered most wasn't the sporting glory. What truly moved him was knowing he had inspired other young people to not give up, to believe in themselves even when the whole world told them otherwise. That was his true victory. His NBA debut was televised to millions. When he stepped onto the court to a standing ovation, Ethan couldn't hold back the tears. He looked up at the stands and saw Marcus smiling as always, applauding discreetly. There were no speeches, no fireworks, just that knowing look that said, "I knew you could do it." That was enough. Over the years, Ethan established himself as a star. He won titles, broke records, and wrote his name into basketball history, but he never forgot his roots. Together with Marcus, he created an institute to support low-income youth, offering sports, education, and psychological counseling. "No one should face what we face alone," he would say at each inauguration, recalling the wounds that turned into scars of victory. Prejudice still existed in the world, but Ethan's story showed that it could be overcome with courage and support. He became a symbol of overcoming obstacles, and his journey was chronicled in books, documentaries, and lectures. More important than that, however, was the direct impact he had on every child he encountered. When he said, "I was just like you," their eyes would shine because he knew the truth behind every word. Marcus, now older, would proudly say that Ethan had gone beyond his own dreams. "You're not just my student, Ethan. You're proof that one man can change the destiny of many." And Ethan would always reply, "It all started because you believed in me first." It was an eternal exchange of gratitude, a cycle that would never be broken. In the end, the story wasn't just about basketball. It was about prejudice, pain, overcoming obstacles, and the courage to believe in yourself. Ethan went from being a failure to a giant, not just in the NBA, but in life. And the message he spread wherever he went was clear. Never judge someone by what you see on the outside, because what may be hidden inside that person is simply extraordinary.